Welcome in, everyone. This is the Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum Private Decentralized Infrastructure Show with Sterlin and Chair. I'm Chair. I'm here to pop you up right there next to me or below me, depending on your screen. Is my friend Sterlin. Sterlin, hello.
Yo, brother. Great to be here. How you doing, Chair?
I'm doing great. It is great to be here. Lots has already happened today. Lots has happened in this past week or so. We did end our streak last week, and now we're starting a new one here on the Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum Private Decentralized Infrastructure Show. But in the week that was, while we were down, quite the exploit was uncovered. Quite the not a 0 day, but quite the exploit happened to an unfortunate amount of people, unfortunate amount of early crypto adopters with the cold card hack. Call it a hack, call it an exploit. Can you call it a hack if the code was sitting in an open source repo for 5 years before anyone realized what happened? What happened from your perspective, Sterlin?
Yeah, so I'm still getting caught up with all this. It was an information overload, but I think effectively what happened. Well, let's start with this. So far on July 30th and expanded on the 1st, approximately like 3 attack waves were confirmed and maybe a 4th flagged with regard to the exploit. And roughly 1,367 BTC were tracked to 4,585 addresses. And the losses are now past 100 million, at least according to the sources that I have in front of me. Chainalysis, by the way, which is the blockchain analytics firm that we have critiqued on this show, I think already a number of times, found that the attacker this is an interesting fact, the attacker pre-studied, did some investigatory research on the victims in advance so that they could hit the largest wallets first, which makes sense, right? So this is probably one of the largest. This is the key thing, and we can ask this as a question if you want. Is this one of the largest self-custody wallet failures that have currently ever happened? Probably up there at the top of the list, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can discuss this. There's a particular avenue or a unique angle that I have that we can get into later, and some of it is even more peripheral to this discussion, but it does have to do with like a maximalist mindset, but we'll get into that. So we can talk about the technicals about how this happened, but to keep it very simple at first, this was a firmware exploit, right? So it based on seed generation for the keys, right? The keys, that your private keys that allow you to maintain the wallet, sign transactions, send funds, right? So seed generation is typically supposed to draw from the hardware, right? TRNG, but silently fell back to MicroPython software, PRNG. Basically what happened, and this is what you mentioned earlier, nobody seemed to notice this exploit, this reversion to the software seed generation, and so it stuck around for a while until somebody exploited it. I did see some news when I was reading about this that the company is at CoinKite / Cold Card had done their own AI analysis some weeks or months ago, and also did not actually uncover the exploit themselves. And I'm sure other people have looked at this as well and did not come to terms with the fact that there was a vulnerability in the firmware or in the code. So and basically how to explain this, why this happened. So because the seed generator was not like true entropic like randomness, that has the levels of entropy needed to actually have a secure seed, which is like effectively multiple galaxies worth of possible options. Instead, that space was greatly diminished, that space of possible seed phrases. So a person with enough compute, and this is exactly what happened, could actually run the different permutations, right? And they could determine From that, they could derive from that what the actual seed phrases were, and then they could effectively drain the wallets. So here's the critical thing about this hack, my friends. The folks, and this is confirmed through commentary that I read on X as I was reading through this over the weekend, but basically, everyone is complaining, or they're suggesting that, man, I did everything right. I had my hardware device properly air gapped, stored away in a safety deposit box, secured. I had not touched it in a number of years, hadn't spent from it in a long, like, it didn't matter what if you had perfect security for that device, particularly you had your passphrase, it didn't matter, because at the end of the day, this was a weakness of the original seed phrase that was generated. And if you, by the way, if you hadn't gotten hacked or hadn't had your funds drained, and even if you updated the and patch your software and patch the firmware, that seed phrase is still weak and can still be exploited in retrospect, right? So you would need to be safe, you would actually have to generate new seed phrase and then move the funds over to the new wallet, right?
Yeah. The best way, or I think the most, the best explanation that I heard, and I think you did a great job there. There are 2,000. The best way that I've heard it explained, like what actually happened. There are 2,000. I think it's 96 some odd words that can be used in a seed phrase. If you envision those 2,000 words on a grid, or if you use the square that I'm in right now as the grid that contains, so words 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 across the first row all the way down, and each row is populated, across this entire square or rectangle grid, contains one possible seed word or word per cell in this grid. And the way that the random number generator was working, and although the entire grid was available for it to choose from, that was actually only choosing like a very small sector of words from the grid. And that is what allowed the exploit to combine not all 2,000 words together, or 2,000 plus words, but just the words from this select sector, because that is what the exploit, or not the exploit, that was the exploit, but the random number generator itself, the one that the fallback one, was only choosing the words from this little quadrant. So the exploiter can just formulate the words from that quadrant and all the different combinations, and then begin testing them on the different wallets. And as you mentioned, they did some due diligence on figuring out which of these wallets were most valuable to attack first, so on and so forth. It's quite spooky, because you could have been doing everything right from the traditional not your keys, not your crypto perspective, and if you have faith in the random, or just in the software in general, then you've had Bitcoins sitting in the same wallet for a long time, and you might have had a certain level of confidence within it. For that to be shattered, it's shattering for everyone. We talk about it pretty frequently, you and I, Sterlin, that back in the day, 10 years or so now, the topic of responsible self-custody, understanding, at least at a basic level or a fundamental level, how things work on the blockchain, how your private and public keys work, and what your responsibility is to keep those secure. But none of that covers, none of those steps cover like reviewing the random number generator that your specific hardware wallet implements, and what the fallbacks might be. And so yeah, like the paradigm has shifted a little bit. I guess rotating wallets and rotating addresses probably can become a larger topic, or should be talked about more. But yeah, this really touches everyone, and everyone that holds any sort of crypto has to be second guessing themselves, if not upgrading their operational security. It's a good time to mention that Keycard and Keycard Shell are not affected by this hack or this exploit in a provable way. Keycard Shell, the world's first and only 100% open source, 100% air gapped hardware wallet. Get yours at keycard.tech and use code CHAIR for a small discount. I don't know what I'm going to do other than rotate my wallets a little more frequently than I used to. Not that I necessarily hold any crypto at all.
And
Yeah.
sorry to interject here. I was just going to mention that just as a quick disclaimer. Of course, nothing that we talk to you guys here about is financial advice by any stretch of the imagination, nor is this advice to take any kind of action if you were indeed a victim of the cold card hack. By the way, always do your own research. Also seek out your whatever kind of remediation from whatever kind of individual or agency that you deem necessary. And by the way, we're not here also to gloat over this or to say that we did things better. We're just here providing commentary for this. And but we are going to critique some of the actors in the space who probably put these folks in a position to become victims in this particular manner. And we're going to get to that here shortly. Sorry, finish your thought, Chair. I just wanted to add that in quickly.
Oh yeah, no, certainly not financial or security advice by any stretch of the imagination. It's interesting how things came together. I saw one critique on X, and it's like, at what point, like, why does having to jump into emergency X space, like, why does that have to be part of my operational security routine? And like, how has that become the norm? Which is an interesting thing. Like, the breaking news, as it unfortunately typically does, was happening on X first, and people were gathering and providing support and commentary in the moment on X, which is a gate kept and censorship filled. Are we past the 10-minute mark? We are. It's a gate kept and censorship filled platform that I have to be mindful that we're past the 10-minute algorithm check portion of the program before I can start talking mess about it. And that's sad. It's a sad state of affairs. But need for a better town square and public square aside, if you weren't plugged in on the day, then you might not have been able to move on it as quickly. I know some people were able to move. There was like 3 waves of attacks, if I understand correctly. So people that were plugged in after the first one were able to reconcile some of those addresses. And I even recall someone saying that they left like some dust in one of their wallets that they were pretty sure might have been exploitable, and they did indeed see that dust get yoinked from them, and that is a technical term. Any interesting reactions that you've observed on your end, Sterlin?
One of them was just kind of heartbreaking, where it was just one of the guys on X. I'll have to dig up the post where he said he lost 1.6 million and it was his life savings. Awful. And then he said that he did everything right, which is part of the critical point of this commentary. And he still lost all of his crypto funds as a result of that. And here's the thing: when this kind of stuff happens, it's one thing to have an exchange hacked, right? We almost kind of expect that. We can easily lambast people for keeping so much funds in an exchange, which are targetable from many different vectors, right? Whether it's a government freeze or seizure, whether it's the institution itself or the platform itself freezing or seizing your funds or glitching out, or whether it's some hacker who sees that exchange or platform as a honeypot and then hack. Like, a lot of different vectors for that. It's like, don't try to self-custody. But now here, self-custody is also under threat potentially. But I think one of the things that it behooves us here to talk about is that this very clearly did not impact all hardware wallets. And there are folks who are friends out there like Aaron Day who have made commentary on, well, this even using a hardware wallet is not quote unquote real self custody. This is a hardcore like self custody maximalist mindset where it's like, if you want self custody, you have your own, you have your own paper wallet, you have your keys on paper, and that's it. That's your hardware. Of course, that has its own weaknesses and limitations too, and threats of losing that or going down in a fire. Like there's always going to be risks that you have to assess with the way that you choose to store your funds. And Cherry, you mentioned earlier about like rotating addresses. I think that's one thing. Also, within your own account, you can have an infinite amount of crypto addresses. Like decentralize the risk by putting like, this is just what I would do, right? Say I held crypto, what I would do is move the crypto and split it up between a bunch of different wallet addresses. There's more work involved in that. And if you want to reconcile at some point in time, that takes time, but it at least makes your risk more dispersed among different wallet addresses. So that's just one thought of a possible way of helping to protect yourself, right? There's also another line of commentary that I think we should take up here, Chair, that you probably have some thoughts on as well, is I think a side effect or a ramification of this is what we can call the custody debate, because there's actors out there who are coming out online and they're saying, oh, look, self-custody is no good. Let's start making sure we get everything put on our exchange. So, of course, self-custody is now being used as a scapegoat to get people to move their funds into a centralized exchange, even though this is just a very isolated, and I don't mean to diminish the losses as a result of this, but it's still an isolated incident, isolated to one kind of wallet and its firmware. And honestly, the lack of preparation and proper scrutiny of their own software. This is, in my opinion, this is the company's fault, right? Okay, so this is not an attack or a diminishment in any sense of the word on all like hardware wallets or all hardware companies or self-custody more generally or broadly speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the maximalist perspective of getting as close to the fundamental procedure as you can without like outsourcing any steps of it, or as few as possible to anyone, not a hardware wallet company or or otherwise. And then it gets into interesting point, like how are you going to generate your own private key, and what method are you going to do? Are you going to roll your World of Warcraft Dungeons and Dragons dice to generate a truly unique key? And most people are not going to do that. You're not going to roll a 100-sided die or more. You need more, right? Actually, to be honest, I'm not even sure what the most secure way of doing it with a dice roll is. But like at least understanding what that means, right? Like you or I can guess a combination of different letters and numbers and put them in a sequence, or have two different sets of dice, one with numbers, one with letters, and randomize the rolls and then randomize the sequence of the outcome rolls, and it would take all day, and hopefully we wrote everything down correctly. And then and only then, now you have your private key, and you can generate, as you said, infinite addresses from that private key. And how many times do you copy that private key, and how many different locations do you store it? And if any one of those locations are compromised, then all of those addresses are compromised. So how do you encrypt, even if someone does find your private key, how do you encrypt it for yourself? It's a convoluted thing. There is no great answer. I haven't, you bring up an interesting point, like how many different hardware wallet producers do I, should one reasonably have to trust? And each one has their own trade-offs. This is the first time that biometric private key generation stuff actually starts to make sense. The problem is the people that actually conduct those biometric crypto operations are some of the worst people that I can think of. Sam Altman, etc. Yeah. As a private, maybe this is something to give up. I'm going to do it. I'm going to generate a Bitcoin private key with dice rolls and weird random entropy that I can think of. And it's probably going to be super insecure. But I haven't actually done it myself. And before I pass too much judgment on it, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to know once and for all for myself how difficult it actually is. Maybe it's not so difficult. And with a combination of dice rolls and then maybe tattooing half of the private key in an encrypted way on my own body, and then tattooing the other half on someone else, and making sure that we are never in the same geographic location ever again. I don't know what that would do or if it would benefit anyone at all, but it would be an interesting exercise. As this show is an interesting exercise, of course, the crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, private, peer-to-peer, decentralized infrastructure show with Sterlin and Chair. Use the chat, folks. I see a few of you are diligently watching. If you have any questions or comments, feedback on the hardware wallet Armageddon. Curious to see what your thoughts are. I don't know. What direction should we take this in, Sterlin? I'm open to going down any road.
Yeah, I did have another thought that we can look at. I mentioned that this is the company's fault. That's my personal opinion. I think that some of this, this is just going to be my take. So some of this happened as a result of hubris, in my opinion. Like this particular hardware wallet was marketed toward and to Bitcoin maximalists, right? And any other wallet was automatically denigrated if it had a multi-asset functionality, right? It was denigrated as a shitcoin wallet and was not to be trusted. So herein lies the hubris that I'm talking about. Folks are going out there, they're actually telling people, oh, don't use these wallets. These are, shitcoin wallets. You're going to lose your money. Well, ironically, the one who ended up losing people money was the one that was allegedly Bitcoin only. It was secure. So part of this is like a myopia or a wearing blinders simply because a company says that it's Bitcoin only so that it naturally feels good for maximalists to use it. And also probably provided a false sense of security in a lot of ways. This is still not to say that it's necessarily or de facto the user's fault by any stretch of the imagination, but it is just to say that even if it is solely Bitcoin based, doesn't mean that it's going to be more secure than any other wallet. And the irony, of course, is that the other hardware wallets, and by the way, they're not perfect either. They have their own possible handicaps and trust gaps that need analysis, but they're not affected by this bug, right? Even Ledger, who we have a lot of critiques of because they have some proprietary aspects of their wallet, and that's a concern, but still they weren't affected by this particular exploit. Chair mentioned obviously Stas Keycard, not affected by this. Keep Key, to my knowledge, not affected by this. Trezor, obviously not affected by this. So I feel like, and here's the thing that makes this worse, in my opinion. There's people who are Bitcoin maximalists who are coming out online, talking about the dice rolls that Chair was just critiqued and talking about. This is they're basically thinking about new ways to figure out how to do this in a more secure way, and have basically considered self-custody via a hardware wallet kind of dead, or at least in massive question, which is weird to me since this is very specifically firmware based. I think this is a purposeful kind of bias from the Bitcoin maxi side, where it's like, since these other wallets don't even count because they're quote unquote shitcoin wallets, then self custody and hardware wallets must by default be all bunk and garbage. And that's clearly just not true, right? And again, I'm not trying to make the claim here that hardware wallets are perfect, but I am saying that the firmware can be done correctly, especially as long as it's open source and auditable, and people actually take the time and they're conscientious enough to go through the process of analyzing that code. And also you know that the hardware is possibly, it's also helpful if it's open source and can be analyzed and looked at. And a lot of the problems right there are solved. But at the end, you in most of our current situations, you are trusting some aspect of a technology to a particular company. But still, again, doesn't mean that hardware wallets and self-custody via hardware wallets is automatically dead or a dead end. And I see this argument largely coming from Bitcoin maximalists who don't even view these other wallets as feasible solutions for self-custody.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, and so far so good for all the other wallets. Yeah, I suppose it goes back to maximalism isn't necessarily good in any in any case. It's interesting. I wonder, you always I wonder about the source. Bitcoin or crypto tribalism is an interesting thing. It's not necessarily healthy, though. And just as probably the healthiest thing in the hardware wallet case is to have multiple different hardware wallets, to have your funds spread out across them, sort of minimizing your risk to any one specific company or protocol. It's probably a good idea. It's probably the same to say that, like, for crypto in general. It's like, maybe don't put every single egg that you have in one flavor of crypto, be it Monero or Bitcoin or Zcash or whatever, Ethereum. That, yeah, mitigating your risk, especially the more that you hoard is the wrong word. The more crypto that you come into possession of, you probably want to diversify. It does put you at risk of different things, like the value of one going down versus the other, but that's for everyone's own personal formula to figure out. This isn't really, I don't know, it's an interesting. So if I have, what if I use the same piece of paper to back up my Bitcoin phrase and my Ethereum phrase? Is that now not a true paper wallet because it's that piece of paper is supporting two different private keys? That's a bad joke. I hope it landed on someone, though. Yeah, the playbook is going to have to change. For new, there was a time. That time has passed, that I was trying to onboard one person to crypto every day. And in the past, it was like Ethereum. Now it's more Logos than anything else, but I'm not trying quite so hard, or quite as hard, to be the evangelist for crypto overall as I used to be, for better or worse. Maybe I need to re-examine that. Well, for one reason, I'm tired, boss. But number two is, it's so paradigm shifting. Like, if you put to go back to the 1.6 million victim that lost their entire life savings, like, you can be led astray. And I've learned the lesson of even joking around and shitposting online can lead certain people astray because they don't realize that you're joking or being sarcastic or what have you, and make like financial decisions based on what people are saying publicly, which is not always the best idea. But then, like, same thing with security. It's like have to be careful of advising people how to move in the crypto streets with their wallets and whatnot, because who knows? Who knows what can and will happen? But the playbook needs to be updated now. Like multiple hardware wallets, multiple private keys generated in different ways, and tracking how much of like what percentage of your stuff you're keeping in any one area. Um, I wonder what this means for the more popular browser-based wallets who have their own random number generators and seed phrase generators, private key generators that, it would seem are a lot more exposed. I am not a security expert by any means, but I wonder, like, what is the difference, for probably for Ethereum, more people have MetaMask generated addresses than anything else, even still today. Where do all those users stand in terms of their confidence that their seed phrases cannot be exploited in the same way that the cold card ones, where I don't have answers. These are just questions that I have.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of, my friend, is like more serious red teaming, and by the companies who are relevant hardware providers. You know whose opinion I'd really like to get on this? We should ask Paul Edge Wallet what his thoughts are on seed phrase generation and what the vulnerabilities are with some of these other platforms. I would imagine that most use the strongest entropy level number generation feasible. I think that is the standard, right? Because this was the thing that happened. The way that I read it is that this was primarily like they had it set up properly. Like cold card was supposed to use hardware based TRNG, right? But the firmware reverted to the MicroPython, to the software number generation, which limited the space of available options. So I think that is one avenue worth considering. There's another thing that I think we can talk about here too, Chair. People might be curious about, like, what is the recoverability options for the victims who lost funds? I think that's something worth exploring a little bit.
It's a great question. I suspect I know the answer, and it's not good news. If your tokens, or if your coins moved to an address that you do not control, sorry.
I think there is some bad news and there's good news. The bad news is exactly what you said. I mean, if those coins move and they don't ever really get moved for the purpose of cashing out, or if they get obfuscated through an atomic swap or some simple swap to a privacy coin like Monero, then we've got some problems. Here's the interesting thing, though. A lot of thieves, and was somebody talking about this. A lot of these, like, quote unquote hacker/thieves aren't always the most adept and don't really understand blockchain forensics very well. So this is a good news, by the way. If they happen to take that Bitcoin and they use a less sophisticated way of obfuscating the source of funds, right? And then they try to cash out on an exchange, there is a possible recovery scenario there, right? Because what would happen, like Chainalysis already has these blockchain analytics firms always have their eye on these funds. They know exactly where they're sitting. They know exactly which wallet address they're sitting in. They know how they move. And they also have a beat on what exchange wallet addresses exist based on open source intelligence on chain. So as soon as these funds flow into a centralized exchange, if they do, assuming they do, they would be frozen immediately in that centralized exchange. And we would also know through KYC. This is not a defense, by the way, of KYC. I'm just explaining the process. Through KYC, they would be de-anonymized, and then also that all that information would be available for a subpoena for law enforcement. I'm just telling you how this works on risk management side. Now, it could it could be that, like, again, the person would have to be very unsophisticated. Now, get this. I want to provide an example. This is really good to talk about. So, you guys familiar, and Aaron, maybe you're familiar with the Bitfinex hack as well. So, in Bitfinex, the the would-be exploiters and hackers and thieves, Razzle Khan and her boyfriend. Remember, she was a rapper, right? So they stole the funds. I don't know all the details of how they got into possession of the funds. I think it was through through himself and through his hacking, but I don't know all the details. But I do know that he tried to get really sophisticated with concealing and obfuscating the funds. He actually programmed, and this happened over the course of years, programmed an application to an automated application to send the funds to different wallets, a bunch of wallets over time, and to break them up and to send them around and to mingle them all over the blockchain in a bunch of different addresses. So, and then eventually tried to cash them out, right? Or some of them out. That won't work. It doesn't matter how complex you make your automated fund sending. I think he even tried to swap some into Ethereum and then swap back and swap. So Chainalysis can very adeptly follow these coin movements. They even have capabilities to look on a single graph at coin swaps between different chains. And this is how they ultimately were able to find out who was in possession of those funds, although it did take years. So there is a white hat scenario for the victims, but if that even does happen, it's years down the line, right? It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. They're not going to see those coins tomorrow. And then if they do, they may not
No
even see them all, right?
Yeah, you have no guarantee. Like, if you're going to put your faith in that, hopefully the perpetrators will move in a way, or your tokens will end up unmixed in a way that can be traced back to you, and they end up on a centralized exchange, that will actually freeze them. Or that's putting faith in so many. You could put your faith in a lot longer, in bigger long shots with more likelihood of them coming true than that. I wonder, has there? I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know any stories. Not, I mean, maybe probably governments end up with more illicit funds, which is that's a whole rabbit hole in itself. But like, I think centralized exchanges are a lot more willing and likely to freeze and turn over tokens to state actors than the actual victims of any sort of, or like, watch state actors come in and say, like, we're going to claim custody of these tokens while we figure out what's going on. We're going to go ahead and hold on to these tokens in our treasury. Yeah, it's that sucks. That, like, if that's, and it may very well be the case that that's the only hope that most of these victims have, them relying on Chainalysis and centralized exchanges and state actors to return their Bitcoin to them. Like, that's probably a long shot.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry to say.
Yeah, I mean, so get this, Mount Gox, right? People actually did get their some people got some of their funds back. Not everyone got their funds back, and it was really a shit show of the government trying to return funds to those folks. But it was like, like a decade later or something. And still not everyone from Mount Gox loss has been made whole after the fact. So, and it's kind of funny. There was a circuitous route that those funds actually took. I think the reason that they finally kind of figured out where they went is because some of those funds went to that Russian exchange that the FBI shut down. What was it called? Something, I think.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I forget the name of it, but that's where some of the funds went. I think that guy actually is in prison, or was gonna be in prison. Yeah, I have some knowledge gaps here in this, but I do know that it was one of those Russian exchanges that ended up getting shut down, put on OFAC and sanctions, etc.
And they're finished now.
So, I mean, yeah, I think the moral of the story here is, don't, no one can anticipate, sadly, getting any kind of funds back anytime soon, if indeed they get them back at all. There's a lot of variables here. One is the sophistication of the hacker, the other, or the exploiter, whatever terminology you want to use. The other is reliance, like you said, Chair, on institutional exchanges, on governments. And governments, like, by the way, they do tend to take funds and hold them for themselves. And we can't really trust governments to do the right thing with funds. They're already deeply involved in things like civil asset forfeiture. They just take people's money anyway and never give it back, even though they never committed a crime or even have been accused of committing a crime. Going down the civil asset forfeiture rabbit hole, by the way, is probably a whole nother topic in and of itself as well.
We do like to spread the topics out on the crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, private, decentralized infrastructure show. We thank you for tuning in. We thank you for using the chat, for subscribing and following along on whichever channel you might be watching, which is wherever you are right here. Make sure you're following Sterlin at Sterlin Lujan on in all the places. I am at Very Comfy, VRYCMFY, on most of the platforms. Well, at this point, Sterlin, what are our lessons learned, and what are we going to do moving forward, having being equipped with at least the knowledge that this exploit took place? The consequences are what they are. What are the lessons learned here? For me, it's diversification of assets and the methods of storing them, and obfuscating where those places might be, although less directly related. How about you?
Yeah, I think aside from diversification, I think also just internalizing the fact that this, especially if you weren't a victim, this is probably harder to stomach if you're not a victim, but just internalizing the idea that self-custody itself is not a dead idea, and that there are different gradations of self-custody, right? So you can do the hardware wallet thing. Hardware wallet's fine. By the way, kind of a funny aside real quick. Well, funny, not funny, depending on who you are. I saw some of the commentary on X is completely wild, right, and unhinged. One guy made a comment basically saying because you can do dice rolls and you can control your own seed, that you should go ahead and keep your cold card wallet. So he was basically saying, just keep your cold card wallet. It's going to be fine. He's telling the victims this, right? Just keep your cold card wallet. Everything's going to be okay. You just, do your dice rolls, boot up your seed yourself, generate your seed yourself. Everything's cool. And everyone's like, are you just a complete dumbass? Because that, in my opinion, that company is dead, right? That's a non-starter. Like, you can't trust, like, all trust is completely destroyed. You really shouldn't have had to trust, like, that's the other thing. You shouldn't have had to trust the company to begin with. This is one of the pitfalls that we're still finding ourselves in crypto, by the way, and this gets me on a bit of a soapbox. So there's still so much trust from the technical side to the cultural side to the people side put into institutions in our space. And one of the modus operandi, the primary philosophical basis of our ecosystem is this notion of trustlessness, right? And that's what self-custody is supposed to be about. So the fact that you had to trust someone to make sure they get firmware right and there's not an exploit is already problematic. This is probably why, again, our friend Aaron Day has recommended to use paper wallet, with all the challenges and learning curves that potentially comes with for users, especially new users in crypto. But I still think just internalizing the idea that you can still self-custody, you can take the necessary precautions. Yes, problems can happen. And if you're really, really terrified, I think Aaron's advice here is sane. Make sure to distribute and decentralize, diversify your funds, etc. I think that's something that's smart to do. I personally still, this is the other thing we can talk about again, because it really is important. I still think relying on centralized exchanges and using what happened as an argument for more centralization, more legal custody is awful. And we want to do what we can to steer away from that. And I think here on the show, we don't support, we continue to support decentralization, anti-financialization, anti-institutional adoption. I'm also not particularly fond of ETFs and all the other assets that have been created as a result of this. So there it
Oh,
is.
I can't wait for fractional reserve banking to take into account Bitcoin holdings and start loaning out fiat dollars based on Bitcoin treasuries. That's happening. That's completely beside the point, but I just was reminded of that. Yeah, I'm gonna. The more I think about it, the more I want to do it. I'm gonna report back on our next show, which will probably be 2 weeks from today. By the way, folks, I'm taking a small vacation next week. But I will procure the as many sided dice as I can possibly procure. And do a little bit of research and due diligence, which every single one of you that can hear my voice at this moment should be doing anyway. Because unless you have a huge crush on me or Sterlin, there's no other reason for you to be tuning into the crypto Bitcoin. And my apologies to you. But there's no other reason that you'd be tuning into the crypto Bitcoin Ethereum private decentralized infrastructure show other than you're interested in and or want to learn more about and or hold your own cryptos. And if that is the case, then it is on you and me and Sterlin and everyone else to do our own research, due diligence, and study. Understand what is at play, what is at risk, what you need to know to keep yourself safe, how attackers and exploiters and perpetrators are moving. You have to know that they're always moving and plotting against you in some way. And you can either be emboldened by that or not. Be motivated to do things a certain way by that or not. But it's really on you. Like every time that we offload responsibility to some other party, you're putting yourself at risk. And you can't 100% offload. You can't 100% bear all of the, I don't want to say responsibility, but like beyond like randomly generating your own stuff and storing it in a way that completely never touches a device even. Like it's very difficult. So your job is to learn on what the best solution is for you. People can make suggestions, people can offer different avenues, but the actual solution for everyone differs slightly depending on who you are. So keeping yourself educated, and I'm guilty of this too, not, you don't want to listen to the same 3 voices or sometimes less as your only sources of information. And so I guess my big call to everyone or anyone that's listening is educate yourself on how these wallets actually operate, how the protocol that you're interacting with actually operates, what those private keys do, how they're generated, and how your specific private keys were generated. Because that's all we can do at the end of the day is like stay as plugged in as we can be and stay as educated as we can be in a rapidly daily evolving space. Thankfully, we have tons of resources, tons of free and open source resources, and increasingly lightweight, powerful LLM models that you can run on your own device and have a little more security in that. Do your reading, do your studying, do your due diligence. It's really the only way that you can protect yourself. And even then, good luck.
Yeah. By the way, sorry to interject, Chair. I have something else we should probably discuss as we get to the last 10 minutes of the show here. One of the things that has been on my mind and that concerns me about this is yet another issue for optics, right? About the cryptocurrency ecosystem in the space. already a tremendous amount of people don't trust crypto. They just see it as a haven for scams and schemes. Now they also continue to see people losing money, not only from centralized exchange hacks, but now the self-custody issue. So let me ask you a question. We can maybe bat this back and forth for a minute. How is this going to worsen the current view people have, the perspective that they have of crypto and our industry generally speaking? And so does it continue to tarnish crypto? And this is one of the reasons why we talk about this a lot on the logo spaces, right? This idea that crypto is originally about these core philosophies, these core tenets, right? Privacy, decentralization, censorship resistance, etc. But we're seeing arguably gaps in that through what happened, and now people are like, maybe I'm staying fucking far away from crypto. I feel like this in some ways does embolden the critics a lot more and diminish the impact of adoption and acceptance of crypto generally speaking.
Yeah, they're good. I mean, this is a big notch in the belt of the detractors of crypto and those who, well, the naysayers. And I don't have a great. I hesitate to offer any pushback if I don't stand firmly on the ground I'm pushing back from, because it's true. Like this. But if anything, I mean, there is no one group. The company certainly, like, to the hardware wallet companies themselves, and making sure their security practices and reviews are as up to date as possible. That's one thing. With the prevalence of LLMs, like, we can go do our own security audits and reviews on whatever we want, right? Like, we can point whatever we want towards whatever open source code that we want, and see what the results are. But there's no one great like answer or solution to this, other than some of the items that we already discussed. But for detractors, yeah, like, this is a moment for them to stand on the rock above the water and say, "I told you so." There are so many reasons to still, for myself personally, I still believe in the promise of what crypto offers to humanity a lot more than I do the fiat banking system and the fractional reserve banking system as it stands today, or really the overall financial. Not that I'm a supreme expert or anything, but the overall foundation that the world global economy is built on might not be a foundation at all. It might be there might be a spring of water underneath it that's eroding it from the bottom, or whatever metaphor works for you. I'm saying that it's not concrete, okay? So it's easy, or maybe I'm just so rooted in my beliefs and so unwilling to budge that I look at this hack and go, "Oh man, that sucks. I hope it doesn't happen to me." And we keep going. But no, this should be a sort of a warning shot to everyone to, like, examine and audit your own setups and your own security measures. And, like, if you're looking at an old hardware wallet or an old address that hasn't been rotated for a while, well, this might be the moment. But again, do your own diligence and watch your own YouTube videos.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point too about that. Okay, I pulled up some numbers here. I had Claude do a little bit of number crunching here. So, all right. Thinking about crypto scams and money loss versus traditional fiat scams and money loss. So, stolen funds from hacks in crypto, this includes ransomware, is roughly 820 million for a Chainalysis 2026 report for the 2025 calendar year. DPRK alone hacked worth 2.02 billion. Wild. That's a state actor, bro. Wild. Okay. So in fiat, fraud and scams totaled a whopping 579.4 billion combined bank fraud and scam losses. with scams at 62 billion. So someone would probably say too that they'll say, oh, well, yeah, the market share of fiat and market circulation of fiat is far greater than crypto. And yeah, while that's true, just look at the nature of fiat though. I mean, even in and of itself, it's a scam, right? It's just a Ponzi scheme that is manipulated regularly by the banking engineers and banking elite in cahoots with governments. So that's just the reality of the current situation. Like, and so I feel like crypto is often a very available scapegoat, a very easy target for people who just don't like it, right? And they just want to shit on something. And at the same time, this allows them maybe mentally to vouchsafe the traditional financial legacy financial ecosystem, even though it is arguably worse on many different verticals for us, right? It's first of all, it's slave money. That's literally what fiat means, by decree. So we shouldn't throw out the baby with the fluoride water, for one, right? So, there's a lot to get into here, but you're 100% right. There's a lot of parallels that we could draw and things we could discuss, but you can't, like, anyone who's just critiquing crypto and they just want to shit on crypto just has a personal axe to grind or some kind of vendetta against the ecosystem for whatever reason. Yet they're still in some way supporting, and maybe there's a case to be made. This is another discussion where they're just supporting gold or whatever. You know, gold can't ever actually be used as currency, at least not in the situation. But my personal vision for crypto, aside from the very strong anonymity and privacy safeguards embedded therein, like having mass adoption and actually using it as currency worldwide, was one of the reasons I got into this space originally and started working with Roger at Bitcoin.com, etc.
You know, gold is just the oldest meme, and crypto is the newest meme, and then there's medium memes in between. All right, somebody write that down. But like the meme of gold being valuable it's probably the oldest, and crypto is the newest. And then there's fiat banking, which is a lot newer than gold, certainly.
Did you see the comment, by the way, Chair? Sorry to interrupt you, but Steven?
Yeah. No, I put that aside. This is a very interesting point. Did you guys see the indicator that they knew about this and were planning to exit scam? I have not. That's a sensational headline if that's the truth. Check out this bad boy. Well, let me do that. Oh, why can't I?
While you pull that up, I did read about this a little bit.
Mhm.
So the primary source that I read about this from was actually from Chainalysis. Chainalysis said through their forensics research and their forensics evidence, and take this with a grain of salt, I'm just relaying what Chainalysis said. They said that there was no evidence that they discovered that CoinKite or Cold Card were actually involved in, exit scamming or involved in theft of the funds. Now, Stephen, that's not to say that, because you don't know what you don't know, right? That's not to say that Cold Card and those guys weren't involved some way, because they could still be they could have been really sneaky about this and probably could have conducted it in a way that Chainalysis wouldn't have known. But you will have to look. Chair's pulling up that X tweet. You probably know more than we do. That's just what I read, and that was within the first days of the hack or exploit. Why do you keep using hack? Not really a hack, right? We talked about this, I guess. Yeah, so I guess Chair is looking that up right now. But I feel like there is, it does seem like there could be a chance or an opportunity that they could have been involved. The targets were obviously lucrative, right? Because it was very specifically, the wallet was specifically targeted at Bitcoin maximalists. The only thing that gives me hesitation or pause as to whether we start to point fingers at Cold Card for being involved in the hack is the fact that there was opportunity from multiple different parties to assess whether there was an exploit in the firmware. And it seems like there were multiple failures on that front. And it seems like if you're Cold Card and you're trying to purposely design this in such a way where you're going to be trying to steal from your own customers, this seems like it would be a little bit too difficult, and there would be a strong amount of risk involved because of the way that it happened or unfolded, right? The fact that it was a firmware malfunction and that you wanted to purposely do that. You knew that people could possibly see it. I don't know. There's a lot of things that we would have to iron out here. What'd you find there, brother?
I'm looking at it's a funny account, the Atlas HODL account. I would say like it's a very interesting angle because who is the most motivated, especially with all of the LLM tools that are available now, that the only people that are more motivated to review vulnerabilities in a set of code are attackers. The attackers are the most motivated because they're motivated by greed. The second most motivated would be, hopefully, the maintainers or creators of the software itself. But amongst those maintainers and creators might also be attackers. So while the discovery of the vulnerability might have been done earnestly or honestly or like with with altruistic intentions, once it becomes discovered, unless things are isolated in such a way, that information, like even somebody can run with just the suggestion, like somebody might say, oh, I found something concerning in the random number generation of XYZ. That's all an attacker or a conspirator would need to be like, hey, I'm, to play the game of telephone with, maybe they're not capable of pulling off such an exploit, but they could certainly pass along the information that this exploit or this vulnerability might exist. And so while it might not be the first most likely place that it was discovered, it is the second most likely place. That doesn't mean that the actual perpetrators are related to or are the Cold Card people themselves. But that's how I look at it. Like from the perspective, from my vantage point, the two most likely people to have found it are the attackers themselves or the good intentioned people that might not have the best OPSEC. Or once the information gets out into the wild, who knows who will do what with it. It's very interesting. I would say I can't click the link directly that was shared in the chat, which is okay, but I'm looking at that account and it's a hilarious account. This Atlas _ HODL. Steven says, I have a bunch that here's some level of admission that occurred. An unusual claim. Apparently there's a history from Cold Wallet that there was people who did point out their bugs, but Cold Wallet would just shame and dismiss their claims. So yeah, well, a sad commentary. Yeah, and that's a common tactic, isn't it? Gaslighting and railroading, bulldogging. Tactics as old as time.
Yeah, I'm glad Steven brought that up. I remember reading something about that too. I think so you guys check out the posts that Vlad on his, maybe Chair can share, but Vlad had made some commentary toward this as well, and I think some other folks had pointed out that they were pretty hostile to people who would point stuff out. This is what I mentioned earlier too. There seemed like there was a degree of hubris on part of the Cold Card team and CoinKite. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they denigrated people who tried to bring up any kind of information or relevant informational facts. This just speaks to, part of this is that maximalist toxicity also that I mentioned, and just the astounding level of carelessness that some of these folks who are in this particular space have actually shown. Kind of reminds me a bit like, you remember the attitude that the Terra Luna founder had, Do Kwon, right? You remember the way that he treated people, like on X. Generally, they would like critique and ask questions about Terra, and they also had concerns about his stable coin. It was like quote unquote algorithmically pegged. They had some concerns that it was more like a scheme or a scam, and that it wasn't actually really going to keep the peg. And of course, lo and behold, it didn't. But he always said, people would issue critiques and he'd be like, "Oh, have fun being poor." Like, I think this plays into this like financialization mindset. The win number go up. We're making it. You're not. We don't have to worry about our technology's perfect. And so I feel like that mindset also, I think you kind of pointed it out earlier as well, Chair, it leads down this path of self-destruction in a lot of ways, and also probably is a red flag for investigators and other people to think twice about your work. But I think if you see, here's a lesson. If you see a very strong degree of arrogance and hubris in company founders, you might actually second guess what they're working on. And I'm not saying this guarantees that they're all going to be scammers, that they're all going to have technologies that have exploits, but it certainly gives us room for pause, right?
Yeah, and it's just off-putting, like I don't.
Yeah,
I like humble founders. Few
100%.
and far between, but they're out there. They are out there.
Indeed.
You have to have some level of chutzpah just to be so wild and narcissistic that you think your idea will do well, but that's a whole other discussion. I appreciate the feedback and the details there, Stephen. I'm gonna follow that account a little more closely. So I have a little bit of homework to do, and I'm going to be off next week, so I'll have plenty of time to do it. But we're going to procure the largest set of dice that we can. We're going to see for ourselves just how difficult it might actually be to randomly generate our own paper wallet without ever exposing it. And then how do you actually use that key without exposing it? That and more on the next Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Private, Decentralized Infrastructure show. This was a good one, Sterlin. I think we talked hot topics. We talked current events. Lots and lots going on all around crypto. This show is brought to you by Keycard. Go to keycard.tech to procure your keycard and keycard shell, the world's first and only 100% open source, 100% air-gapped hardware wallet that is not affected by the cold card random number generator exploit. Anything in conclusion for the people, Sterlin?
Nope. I just want to thank Stephen. It's been a while since I heard from him. Good to see you, Stephen. Thanks for the questions and the engagement here, my friend. And other than that, I don't have anything else. This was a really fun show.
We'll see you folks in 2 weeks. Until then, follow Sterlin at Sterlin Lujan. Follow me if you like at Very Comfy, VRYCMFY. Use Logos technology. Run Logos nodes. Download Logos Basecamp. We'll see you over there. The world is a lie. That lie is the truth. Mahalo.